What if one cold winter night could change everything? Picture a man who had lost the love of his life, trapped inside a house filled with silence, grief, and empty chairs. Now imagine a little girl, no older than 6, digging through trash in the freezing snow, her hands raw and red, clutching nothing but a rusted button. When their paths crossed, it was not just about saving a child from hunger. It was about two broken hearts finding a way to heal each other, about hope being reborn in the unlikeliest moment. This is not a story of wealth or status, it is a story of kindness, of second chances, and of how love can be chosen. Stay with us, because what happens next will move you deeply and might just change how you see family forever. Subscribe now to Loss and Healing for more stories that restore faith and love in humanity. The clock ticked with an almost painful rhythm, each chime echoing through the vast Blake estate like a reminder of what was missing. The house was magnificent. Marble floors that gleamed like ice, ceilings high enough to make a man feel smaller than he already did, yet it felt like a tomb rather than a home. The silence here was not peace. It was an ache that clung to the air, heavy and unyielding. On the glass coffee table sat 2 cups, but only one had been touched. The second one had gone cold weeks ago, the faint lipstick mark still visible on its porcelain rim. Grace had always taken her coffee with cinnamon and cream. Ethan Blake had not found the strength to move the mug, as if leaving it there could hold her presence a little longer. The velvet armchair angled just slightly toward his seat, as if she had only stepped out for a moment and might return, but no one did. The Christmas tree blinked quietly in the corner, its lights weak against the vast shadows of the room. A gold ornament trembled slightly with each burst of heat from the furnace. Yet there was no laughter upstairs, no smell of cookies baking, no holiday cheer. Only Zoe, curled on the rug in unicorn pajamas, clutching a handmade doll stitched by Grace years ago from an old sweater. The yarn hair was frayed, one button eye barely hanging, but Zoe held it close as if it were the last piece of her mother she could touch. She had not spoken much since the accident. Ethan had not either. Words felt dangerous, like they might open wounds too deep to bear. He sat hunched on the leather couch, staring at the blinking lights as though they might somehow distract him from the hollow echo inside his chest. The wind pressed against the frosted windows, rattling the glass as if the world outside was demanding to be let in. Ethan rose slowly, his body heavy with grief, and stepped toward the tall window that overlooked the snowy yard. The birch trees stood pale and still, guardians of a landscape that seemed frozen in mourning. His breath clouded the glass as he leaned closer. That was when he saw it. At first, he thought it was an animal, a raccoon perhaps, scurrying around the trash bins. But then, the shadow stood, fragile and small. It was a child. She could not have been older than Zoe, maybe 5 or 6. The oversized coat she wore swallowed her tiny frame, hanging to her knees. Her feet were wrapped in mismatched socks stuffed into sandals, soaked from the snow. Her bare hands, red and cracked from the cold, lifted the trash can lid with effort. She leaned inside, searching for something, anything. Ethan froze, breath caught in his throat. For weeks, he had been unable to move forward in his own life, and now here was a child struggling to survive in the cold night outside his window. His chest tightened, something stirring inside him that had been buried under layers of grief. Before he even realized it, he had pulled on his coat and stepped into the freezing air. The cold slapped his skin, sharp and unwelcoming. His breath turned to mist as he walked toward the small figure. "Hey!" he called gently, not loud enough to frighten her. She stopped, stiff as stone, clutching something in her fist. Slowly she turned. In her palm, barely visible in the dim light, was a rusted metal button. Her eyes met his, wide and fearful, the eyes of a child who had learned to expect rejection, punishment, or worse. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, his voice low and steady. "I am not going to hurt you. Are you all right?" She said nothing. He tried again. "Are you hungry?" For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, in a whisper so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind itself, she answered, "They are all gone." Ethan did not ask who she meant. He did not need to. The truth was etched into her gaunt face, her trembling body. She did not flinch when the wind caught her coat again. She only clutched the button tighter, as though it were the last anchor to a world that had already slipped away. Something shifted inside Ethan. He knelt in the snow, not from pity but from instinct, meeting her frightened eyes on her level. "Christmas is meant for family," he said softly, his voice catching. "No one should be alone tonight. Would you like to come inside? Be warm? Maybe celebrate with me and my daughter?" The space between them felt fragile, like thin ice ready to crack. The girl's gaze flicked from the dark house to Ethan and back again. She did not nod, but she took one step forward, then another. Ethan rose slowly and extended his hand. She stared at it for a long time as though it were something foreign, something she had not been offered in far too long. Then, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. It was ice cold. He swallowed hard. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Her lips parted. "Ruby." "Ruby," he repeated, the name soft on his tongue. He led her toward the house, the snow falling heavier behind them, erasing their footprints as they walked. He did not look back. Something had shifted, fragile but undeniable. He held the door open and let her step inside. In that moment, a line was drawn between the world outside and the world within, between loneliness and the possibility of something new. Warmth enveloped her immediately, but she froze at the threshold, hesitant, as though afraid someone would push her back out. Her hair, tangled and heavy with snowflakes, dripped small rivers down her cheeks. She still clutched the button in her fist, her body tense like a cornered animal. Ethan closed the door behind them quietly, careful not to startle her. The Christmas lights glowed softly in the corner. The fireplace flickered. Zoe stirred on the rug, blinking sleepily, her ragged doll still clutched tight. She looked at Ruby without words, only with the quiet curiosity of one child seeing another who carried the same invisible weight. Ruby did not speak. She only stood there, trembling, the line between inside and outside still raw in her mind. Ethan's voice was soft, almost pleading. "You are safe here." And though Ruby did not answer, though her shoulders stayed tight and her hand clutched that rusted button as if it were life itself, she did not run. She stayed. And in that simple act of staying, something Ethan thought had been lost forever began to stir again. A fragile hope, hidden beneath layers of grief, whispered that this night could be the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The warmth of the house was overwhelming to Ruby at first. She stood frozen near the door, as if her thin socks might break the floor beneath her. Her eyes darted across the tall ceiling, the blinking Christmas tree lights, the staircase that seemed to climb into forever. She did not dare move further. Her body braced to hear someone say she did not belong here. Snowflakes melted in her tangled hair, trickling down her cheeks like tears that never had the chance to fall. Ethan closed the door softly, sealing out the biting wind. He gave her space, careful not to crowd her, and said gently, "It is all right. You are safe here." His voice was quiet but steady, the kind of voice he had forgotten he could use. For months, silence had swallowed him, but now words seemed necessary. Ruby did not answer. She clutched the button in her hand so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her thin shoulders shook as she stood in the soft glow of the room.
Daddy.
Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to ease her fear, to give her something familiar, something warm.
I'm sorry.
He turned to the kitchen. "I will get you something,"
sorry.
he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. He returned with a mug of hot chocolate, steam rising gently from its surface topped with marshmallows. The mug was red with white snowflakes, one of Grace's favorites. For a long moment, Ethan hesitated to use it, but somehow it felt right, as if Grace herself would not mind. He knelt down, holding the cup out carefully. Ruby blinked at it, uncertain, then reached with her free hand, the one not clutching the button. Her fingers trembled as she
I am
wrapped
so
them around
glad
the
you are
mug,
safe.
holding it awkwardly as though she had never been given something so delicate before. Ethan smiled softly. "Careful, it is warm." She nodded, raised it to her lips, and took the smallest sip. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she took another. A quiet breath left Ethan, a sound of relief so soft it was almost invisible. For the first time in months, he felt like something inside him was breathing again. Then footsteps. Zoe appeared at the top of the staircase, dragging her ragged doll behind her, her unicorn pajamas too long at the sleeves. Her hair was messy from sleep, but her eyes were wide awake as they fixed on the unfamiliar girl standing in their living room. Ruby froze, clutching the mug as if it were a shield. Zoe descended slowly, one step at a time, the doll bumping against each stair. She reached the bottom and stopped. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Ruby's shoulder. "It is all right," he whispered. The two girls looked at each other, silent, neither afraid nor polite, just curious. The silence stretched, fragile but alive. Then Zoe moved forward, step by step, until she stood close enough to see the cracks in Ruby's chapped lips and the dirt smudged on her face. Ruby's grip on the mug tightened, her eyes darting nervously. Zoe glanced down at her doll. Its button eyes and crooked smile told a story of years of being loved, torn, and repaired. She looked back at Ruby and without hesitation held it out. "You can hold her if you want," Zoe said softly. Ruby blinked, shocked. Her lips parted but no words came. She shook her head quickly, almost retreating. Zoe stepped closer. "She is not scared of strangers," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "She just takes time to be brave sometimes." Ruby looked down at the doll, then at Zoe, then back at the steaming mug in her hand. Slowly, almost as if testing the air, she reached out and touched the doll with the tips of her fingers. Her touch was feather-light, as though she feared it might disappear. Zoe smiled, small but genuine. She nudged the doll closer.
I remember those
This time,
earrings.
Ruby took it.
Worn
Their
on
fingers
Sundays.
brushed for only a moment, but something shifted in the room. Ethan saw it, felt it, like the air itself had changed. He swallowed hard, his eyes stinging as if tears were waiting to fall. The two girls stood there, silent but connected by something deeper than words. Zoe sat cross-legged on the rug and patted the space beside her. Ruby hesitated, then looked up at Ethan. He gave her a gentle nod. Slowly, Ruby lowered herself to the rug, the oversized coat pooling around her. She clutched the doll with one hand, the button with the other, and kept the mug close. Zoe leaned toward her, whispering something Ethan could not hear. Ruby did not respond, but her posture softened, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Ethan stepped back, watching from the armchair where Grace had once sat. He lowered himself into it and let the scene play out. For months, that chair had been a place of sorrow, a reminder of absence. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a witness to something fragile and new. The fireplace crackled softly. The tree lights blinked gently, filling the silence with their patient glow. Two little girls sat side by side, one offering, the other receiving, both clinging to small pieces of comfort: a doll, a button, a cup of cocoa. Ethan sat quietly, letting the tears dry on his cheeks. For the first time since Grace's passing, he did not feel like he was drowning in the silence. Instead, he felt something stir, something small, fragile, but real. Hours passed in cautious companionship. The fire burned low, the cocoa mugs grew empty, Ruby's eyelids drooped, her body swaying with fatigue. She did not say she was tired, nor did she ask for a bed. She simply curled against the arm of the couch, clutching Zoe's doll and her rusted button, her breathing soft and uneven. Ethan approached gently, his movements careful, as if afraid to wake her. He leaned down and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her upstairs, into the guest room that still smelled faintly of fresh sheets. It was not a child's room, not yet, but it was warm. He laid her gently on the bed, tucked a throw blanket around her, and placed an extra pillow near her side. Her small hand remained clenched around the button, knuckles white even in sleep. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, noticing the faint heat radiating from her skin. His chest tightened. He pressed his hand against her brow, frowning at the warmth. She was feverish. He stood abruptly, rummaging through the closet for medicine, his hands trembling. When he returned, he checked her temperature with a thermometer, the number flashing higher than he wished. He whispered a curse under his breath. Then he dialed the family doctor. When the call ended, he returned to Ruby's side with a damp cloth. He laid it across her forehead. She stirred, whimpered softly, but did not wake. Ethan's eyes fell to her clenched fist around the button. He tried carefully to ease her fingers open. The moment he touched them, her hand tightened. Her lips moved faintly, as if speaking to someone long gone. Ethan's heart ached. He sighed and whispered, "All right, sweetheart. Hold on to it." He sat back, the room bathed in silver moonlight filtering through the curtains. For the first time in months, he felt the quiet was not suffocating. It was alive with possibility. The night was long and filled with whispers of worry. Ethan sat beside the guest bed, the old wooden chair creaking softly beneath his weight. Ruby lay curled under the blanket, her face pale except for the feverish flush on her cheeks. Her little hand was still clenched tight around the rusted button, as though it were the only thing tethering her to safety. He leaned closer, adjusting the damp cloth on her forehead, listening to her shallow breaths. Each rise and fall of her chest felt like a fragile miracle. Downstairs, Zoe hummed quietly to herself, her small voice carrying faintly through the vents. That sound alone was enough to make Ethan's chest ache. She had not sung since Grace died, had not hummed or giggled freely. And yet tonight, she did. Something about the presence of another child, even a broken one, had stirred life back into his own daughter. Time dragged. Ethan checked the thermometer again, whispering encouragement to himself as the fever slowly began to drop. He slipped a sip of medicine between Ruby's lips, careful not to wake her fully. She stirred, her brows furrowing, her lips moving in half-formed words. He froze when he heard it. Daddy. The word was faint, little more than a breath, but it pierced him deeper than anything had in months. His heart thudded hard in his chest. He sat still, afraid to even breathe, watching her lips tremble. Daddy, she whispered again, her voice breaking like a fragile thread. Ethan's throat closed. He had not heard that word spoken with such tenderness since Grace's funeral. Zoe had stopped using it, switching to Dad, flat and distant, as if she could no longer bring herself to call him with the warmth she once had. Now this little girl, a stranger only hours ago, whispered it through fever and sleep. She did not mean him, not consciously, but still it was as if the word had cracked something locked inside his chest. His hand shook as he reached forward, gently covering hers, enclosing the button in both their palms.
Are you ready for a
I am
surprise
here,
after
he
dinner?
whispered.
Yes.
You are safe. I have you. Her breathing steadied, her body relaxed against the blanket. And Ethan sat there trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden rush of something he thought he had
We're
buried
almost
too
there.
deep to feel again. It was not grief this time. It was something older, gentler, hope. He remained awake long after midnight, watching the moonlight shift across the room. When Zoe peeked in later, holding a crayon drawing, his heart swelled at the sight. She handed it to him shyly, her small fingers smudged with color. The picture showed 3 figures, not 2, standing together beneath a red heart. Beside them was a dog they did not yet own but had once promised. At the bottom, in her uneven handwriting, Zoe had written one simple word, us. Ethan crouched down, pulling her into a tight embrace. His voice was thick as he whispered, "It is beautiful. She will love it." Zoe pressed her face into his shoulder and asked, muffled, "Can we keep her?" He could not answer, not yet. He kissed the top of her head instead and sent her back
All
to
yours
bed,
always.
her little feet padding softly down the hall. When he returned to Ruby's side, he propped the drawing against the nightstand lamp so that when she woke, she would see it first. As the hours passed, Ruby's fever broke. Her breaths grew deeper, calmer. Ethan's head drooped against the chair, exhaustion tugging at him, but he refused to leave her side. At some point, he must have dozed, because when dawn light spilled across the curtains, he woke with his hand still near hers. She slept soundly, the button still clutched, but her grip looser now. Her face was peaceful, her skin cool to the touch. Relief washed through him like a tide. Downstairs,
Good night.
Zoe's
Good
voice
night.
floated up again. She was speaking softly, perhaps to her dolls or maybe to the walls of the house itself. Either way, it was a sound Ethan had thought he might never hear again. He smiled faintly, stretching
Is
the
this
ache from his
forever?
neck and tucked
Or
Ruby's
until someone
blanket
comes?
higher over her shoulder. Later that morning, he set out paper, scissors,
I vow
and
to do
glue
everything
on the
in my
coffee
power
table. It
to
was
make
something
us
Grace had
last
always
forever.
done at Christmas, cutting snowflakes from scraps and hanging them across the windows. He had not intended to decorate this year. The idea had felt pointless. But
how have
now,
things been
with
since our
Ruby
last
still
visit?
resting
Oh,
upstairs,
much better.
he found
Thank you
himself
for asking.
whispering the question aloud when she stirred, "Would you like to make snowflakes with us?" Ruby blinked at
made
him,
them
uncertain,
ourselves.
her hair a tangled halo around her face. He smiled
I am
gently.
getting a lot
They
more
are not as
sleep
cold
and
as
a
the
lot
real
more
ones,
laughter these
and we
days.
can put them on the windows so they will last longer. She hesitated, then nodded slowly.
She belongs here.
Downstairs, Zoe was waiting cross-legged on the rug, scissors already in hand, her face lit with excitement.
I recommend
Ruby
you start
shuffled
the
in wearing
permanency
pajamas
process.
slightly too big, borrowed from Zoe, the button tucked safely in her pocket. She lowered herself to the rug without a word, her body stiff but present. The 3 of them sat
Thank you for
together,
letting me stay
folding
here.
paper, cutting shapes, laughing softly when the designs turned out crooked or strange. Ethan watched as Ruby's hands, once hesitant, began to grow steadier. Her snowflakes were simple but symmetrical, careful, and precise. Soon, the room was filled with a flurry of paper trimmings drifting to the floor like real snow. At one point, Zoe pressed her hand against the window, holding up her paper snowflake to compare with the falling flakes outside. Ruby joined her, side by side, her small voice breaking the silence. "This one is mine." Her tone was quiet but sure. Zoe grinned. "It looks like a crown." Ruby shook her head. "It looks like my mother's earrings." The words fell into the room with a weight heavier than paper. Ethan froze, his breath catching. Ruby's gaze was fixed on the snowflake, her eyes distant. "She wore them on Sundays," she whispered. "Even when they were broken. She said they sparkled anyway." The fire crackled. Zoe looked down at her doll, then reached across and gently placed it between them, offering comfort without words. Ethan stepped into the hallway, his chest tightening as memories of Grace flooded back. She too had worn earrings on Sunday mornings, fragile but beautiful, always making the day feel brighter. He pressed a hand to his face, trying to hold back the tide of grief. When he returned, the girls had arranged their paper snowflakes across the mantel. In the center, taped with glitter and cardboard, was Zoe's drawing from the night before. Beside it, Ruby had added her own, another picture of 3 figures beneath a heart, this time with a button drawn in her small hand. At the bottom, in careful letters, it read, "My new family." Ethan's knees almost gave way. Ruby noticed and crossed the room, holding out her drawing silently. Her eyes searched his, waiting for something she was too afraid to say aloud. Ethan looked at her picture, then at her, and whispered, "I think you already are." In that moment, Zoe clapped softly and leaned against Ruby's side. The 3 of them stood together, the fireplace glowing, the mantel lined with crooked snowflakes and fragile hope. The silence in the house was no longer empty, it was full. The knock at the door was polite but firm, the kind that carried authority even in its softness. Ethan froze in the hallway, a laundry basket balanced in his arms, as the sound echoed through the quiet house. Upstairs, laughter floated down, the unmistakable giggles of Zoe and Ruby playing together. Ruby had only just begun to giggle, a sound so fragile it felt like a gift. Setting the basket aside, Ethan walked to the door and opened it. A woman stood bundled in a navy coat, a clipboard in one hand, and an ID badge glinting in the pale winter light. Her dark eyes met his steadily but not unkindly.
Okay,
"Mr. Blake?"
I will draw the
she asked.
cake.
"Yes. I am Angela Ruiz,
draw the
Department of
balloons."
Child and Family Services. You called our emergency line on Christmas Day?" Ethan's heart tightened. He nodded. "Yes. I found her. Ruby." Angela gave a small smile as she stepped inside, removing her gloves. At once, the warmth of cocoa and cinnamon still lingering from the afternoon baking drifted toward her. Her gaze moved with practiced care across the living room, noting the decorated mantel, the scattered snowflakes taped to the windows, the drawings on the fridge. It was a home alive with children's presents. "She is upstairs with my daughter," Ethan said softly. "Zoe." Angela nodded. "I will meet them soon. For now, let us talk." They sat across from one another in the living room. Ethan perched tensely on the couch, while Angela crossed her legs neatly in the chair opposite. She flipped open her folder. "I understand Ruby has been with you for several days now." "Since Christmas morning," Ethan confirmed. "She was outside, going through my trash." His voice faltered on the words, heavy with memory. Angela jotted a note. "And your relationship with her before that moment?" "There was none. She was a stranger." He hesitated, then added more firmly, "But she is not a stranger anymore." Angela's gaze lifted from her papers. "You are aware, Mr. Blake, that under state law, housing a minor without notifying authorities can be considered custodial interference." Ethan bristled, his reply sharper than he intended. "I did notify you. I called." No one answered. It was Christmas. Angela's expression softened. "I understand, and since then she has been safe here, fed, warm." "She is more than that," Ethan said quickly, his voice thick with urgency. "She is part of us now." Angela's brows lifted slightly, though her face remained calm. "You speak as though this is permanent." Ethan exhaled, his hands clasping together tightly. "I was not trying to rescue anyone. But she walked into our lives and suddenly everything mattered again.
Hello
For
there.
Zoe, for
Hi.
me. His voice cracked, and he forced himself to steady it. You have not seen how she sleeps like she is waiting for someone to take her away. Or how she eats, carefully, as if the food might disappear. Or how she clings to that button as though it is the last piece of her mother she has left. Angela looked at him quietly. That detail had not been in the file yet. She wrote it down slowly, then closed the folder. I would like to see where she is staying. Ethan nodded and led her upstairs. In Zoe's room, the two girls were crouched on the carpet, building a crooked tower of blocks. Fairy lights strung along the ceiling twinkled above them. A sleeping bag lay neatly beside Zoe's bed, evidence of Ruby's temporary place. Ruby looked up when they entered, her eyes cautious but not panicked. Angela crouched to her level, her voice gentle. Hi, Ruby, I am Angela. May I sit with you for a moment?
It's an important
Ruby
choice,
nodded
but you will
faintly
have
but
time
pressed
to think
closer
about
to
it.
Zoe. Angela's eyes scanned the room, noting the folded clothes, the stack of books, the water glass on the nightstand, all signs of
Look how
care.
pretty the
She has
sky
only
is
been here a
tonight.
few days,
It's so
Ethan explained
orange
softly,
and
almost
pink.
apologetic. I am converting Grace's art studio into a proper bedroom for her. His voice faltered as he
Okay.
said his late wife's name.
Yes.
Angela looked up and nodded. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, Ethan replied quietly. Back downstairs, Angela set her folder on the coffee table. Mr. Blake, I will not sugarcoat this.
Really tidy.
If you wish to pursue guardianship or adoption, there will be interviews, home studies, background checks, and searches for next of kin. These processes take time. I understand, Ethan said. You are a public figure, a CEO, a man with resources. That brings both advantages and scrutiny. Some will question your motives. I do not care about appearances, Ethan replied almost fiercely. Angela glanced toward the fridge, where Ruby's drawing hung proudly. 3 people beneath a red heart. Whether you care or not, others will. But I will say this, you have clearly made her feel safe. And that matters. Ethan lowered his gaze. His voice softened. She brought my daughter back to life. Zoe had stopped laughing, stopped playing. I thought I was losing her too. Then Ruby came, and somehow Zoe began to protect again, to feel again. I did not expect that. Angela did not write this part down. She only closed her folder and gave a thoughtful nod. That night,
Thank
Ethan
you.
tucked Zoe into bed. Ruby settled into the sleeping bag beside her, clutching Zoe's doll and her button. Ethan turned off the light, but before he could leave, a cry broke the dark. Daddy, it was not Zoe, it was Ruby. Ethan rushed back,
Do you
kneeling
understand
beside
the
her as she
adoption
thrashed
process?
lightly in her sleep, her fists clenched.
Adoption
Ruby,
means
he
we
whispered.
choose each
Her
other,
eyes shot
and
open,
we belong.
wild and afraid. She gasped, her voice trembling. Do not let them take me. Please,
I
do
vow
not
to
let them
love
take me.
and protect you
Without
as my own.
hesitation, Ethan lifted her into his arms. She clung to him fiercely, her forehead pressed to his chest. You are safe, he murmured, rocking her
Oh my
gently.
goodness, I can't
No one
believe
is
it.
taking you. Not tonight. Not ever.
This is
In the
truly
hallway,
amazing.
unseen, Angela stood silently, her coat over her arm. She had heard everything. She watched the way Ethan held Ruby, not like a man filling a role, but like a father whose heart already belonged. She lingered for a moment, then turned quietly and walked out, her footsteps soft against the rug. On her clipboard, she wrote one final note before leaving. Attachment observed. Strong recommendation for long-term placement. The art studio had once been Grace's sanctuary, a room filled with the smell of paint and eucalyptus, where canvases leaned against the walls and unfinished sketches clung to life on scraps of paper. For months, Ethan had avoided the space, the half-painted sunflower on the easel too painful to face. It had stood there untouched, frozen in time like a breath caught between heartbeats. But now, after Angela's visit, after Ruby's fever had broken, Ethan stood in the doorway holding a paint roller.
Thank you for seeing
His heart
me.
pounded as though he were trespassing, yet he knew what Grace would have wanted. He whispered into the stillness, every room deserves a story. It is time this one had a new one. And so the transformation began. By day, he painted the walls a soft green, chosen carefully with Zoe's help. Like leaves, she said, tracing her crayon to show the shade. By night, he closed the door so Ruby would not see. Together,
So how
he
was
and
your
Zoe
day at
assembled shelves,
Good.
hung string lights,
I like
and rolled
school.
out a plush rug. Each choice was deliberate, a piece of
Welcome.
hope
So
stitched
glad
into
to
a
see
room
you
that had
all.
once been heavy with absence. On the third day, The studio no longer looked like Grace's unfinished dream. It looked like the beginning of another. The window seat was piled with pillows, stacks of children's books lined the shelves, and a white desk stood beneath golden stars Zoe had pressed to the wood herself. Above the bed, Ethan glued wooden letters one by one until they spelled RUBY. That evening, over bowls of tomato soup and grilled cheese, Ethan looked across the table at Ruby. Her cheeks were healthier now, a faint pink instead of fever's flush. She was wearing one of Zoe's sweatshirts, the sleeves too long, but she looked warm. He asked softly, "Are you ready for a surprise?" Ruby tilted her head, cautious but curious. "A surprise?" He nodded. "Come with me." Zoe bounced from her chair, beaming. "You are going to love it." The three of them climbed the stairs together, Ruby in the middle clutching her button in her fist. Ethan stopped at the door, the knob gleaming from polish. A note, scribbled in Zoe's handwriting, was taped beneath it. For Ruby. "No peeking until Daddy says go."
All right,
Ethan crouched down, his voice soft. "Are you ready?" Ruby's lips trembled, but she nodded. He opened the door. Warm yellow light spilled out. The green walls glowed like spring. The bed was neatly made with cozy linens, a crescent moon stitched into the pillow. The window seat overlooked the snowy yard. A tiny cup of crayons waited on the desk. In the center of the rug sat a plush teddy bear holding a red heart. Ruby froze in the doorway. Her breath caught. She did not move. Her eyes traveled slowly across every corner of the room, as though afraid it might vanish if she blinked. "This is mine?" she whispered. "All yours," Ethan said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Always." Her hand opened slowly, the rusted button glinting in her palm. "Can I keep it in here?" "You can put it wherever you want," Ethan said. She walked to the dresser and placed the button carefully inside the top drawer, as if locking a treasure into a vault. Then she traced the letters above the bed with her small fingers. "You spelled it right." "That was the easy part," Ethan answered, smiling through the sting in his eyes. She turned suddenly and threw her arms around him.
It was really
Not
nice
shy,
seeing you again.
not tentative, but
nice to
fierce
see
and
you.
full. Ethan knelt and wrapped her in his arms, his heart thudding against her small frame. Zoe stood in the hallway grinning like it was her birthday. That night, as bedtime approached, Zoe appeared at Ethan's study door with her blanket. "Can I sleep in her room?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow.
Bye.
"In your sleeping bag?" "No, I brought my pillow," she insisted. Ethan followed her back to Ruby's new room, where Ruby was brushing the hair of a new doll he had given her that morning. She had named it Daisy, a doll with chestnut curls and a yellow dress. Zoe climbed onto the bed, handing Ruby her own doll. "Daisy and
All right.
Lily are friends
Which one
now,"
do you
she
wanna start
declared.
with today?
Ruby looked from one doll to the other and smiled. Together they crawled under the blanket, the fairy lights above twinkling like captured stars. Ethan adjusted the thermostat, kissed their foreheads and turned to
And they
leave.
lived happily
"Daddy?"
ever
Ruby's voice
after.
stopped him. He turned back. "Yes, sweetheart?" Her eyes were wide, glistening with a question heavier than any child should have to ask. "Is this forever, or just until someone comes?" Ethan knelt by her bed,
You are doing
meeting her
great.
gaze.
Keep
"I hope
pedaling."
it is forever, and I am going to do everything I can to make sure it is."
You did it.
Ruby did not reply. She reached out and slipped her small hand into his. A few days later, Angela returned for a follow-up. This time, Ethan did not feel fear at her presence. Ruby greeted her with a shy smile. Zoe eagerly showed her the snowflake garland they had made together, and both girls offered her cookies, burned at the edges but sweet. Angela sat at the kitchen table with her folder open. "She is sleeping through the night now?" "No nightmares in over a week," Ethan answered. "She is eating, laughing. She is alive again." Angela looked across the room where Ruby and Zoe sat curled on the couch in a tangle of blankets and dolls. The corners of her mouth lifted. "The change in her is remarkable." Ethan leaned forward. "She belongs here." Angela studied him, then closed the folder. "It is time you spoke to a family attorney. We should start the process of permanency." Ethan's heart caught in his throat. He nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling deep inside him. Ruby's drawing still hung on the refrigerator, now joined by a new one with 4 figures: Ruby, Zoe, Ethan, and a woman with glasses holding a clipboard. Angela chuckled when she saw it. "I guess I made the cut." "You did," Ethan replied with a rare smile. When she left, Ruby ran to the door to say goodbye. Angela crouched to her level. "Take care, okay?" Ruby nodded.
Look at these.
"Thank you for helping
get
me
this
stay." Angela's eyes glistened as she whispered, You are the brave one, kiddo. When the door closed behind her, Ethan stood for a long moment, his hand against the wood. Then he turned back toward the living room where two little girls were busy with crayons, laughter spilling into the air like the sound of healing itself. For the first time in years,
There
the
you
future
go.
did not
Happy
feel like
reading.
something to fear. It felt like something to build. Spring came quietly to Portland, melting away the last remnants of winter. Icicles dripped from the gutters, puddles shimmered on the driveway, and the Blake home no longer echoed with emptiness. It buzzed with life, with two little girls planning Ruby's 6th birthday in the living room. Zoe spoke with exaggerated authority, balancing a crayon like a cigar as she declared, "We do not need ponies or bounce houses, we just need love." And cupcakes. Ruby, cross-legged beside her, nodded solemnly and added, "And candles. 6 of them." Ethan, listening from the kitchen while stirring macaroni and cheese, smiled quietly to himself. Grace had always been the one to orchestrate birthdays with grand decorations and castle-shaped cakes. Ethan had thought those days gone forever, but now, with Ruby humming softly and Zoe brimming with ideas, he realized celebrations could be simple and still matter just as much. In the days leading up to the party, the house transformed into a whirlwind of construction paper banners, mismatched streamers, and whispered secrets. Zoe insisted on handling the decorations herself, reminding Ethan with solemn eyes, "This is her first real birthday. It has to feel like home." Ruby asked for very little. She did not know how to want much, never having been given the chance.
Perfect.
When Ethan asked what she
Smells
wished
so
for,
good.
she whispered only,
Can I have another
"Can we
one?
have dinner at the table together, with music?" The simplicity of the request struck him harder than any lavish demand could have. The night before her birthday, Ethan sat at the edge of Ruby's bed, a small wrapped box in his hands. She blinked at him curiously, fingers grazing the ribbon.
You are safe.
"This is not your real present," he told her softly, "but I wanted you to have it
Ready to
tonight."
ride?
Inside the box
Let's
was a
go.
silver locket,
I'm so
delicate
sad.
and shining. One side held a photo of her mother, scanned and restored from the social services file. The other side held a new photo, taken just days ago, Ethan, Zoe, and Ruby sitting together on the porch, arms around each other, smiling. Ruby opened the locket with trembling hands. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Tears gathered in her eyes as she clutched it to her chest. "I miss her
careful
every
there."
day," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said gently, resting his chin on her hair. "And I believe she would be proud of you. Proud of how brave you are, of how much love you carry." Ruby pressed her face into his sweater, silent but clinging fiercely. The birthday arrived with quiet joy. The dining table was draped in a cartoon heart tablecloth. 6 cupcakes stood on a chipped porcelain stand, each one frosted in a different color because Zoe wanted them to look like fireworks. A crooked banner stretched across the window reading, "Happy Birthday, Ruby," the letters uneven but radiant. Angela Ruiz arrived in the afternoon with a gift wrapped in comic strip pages. Ruby hugged her tightly without hesitation, surprising them all. Angela smiled warmly. "That is new," she said. When it came time for the song, the lights dimmed. Ruby stood between Ethan and Zoe, her small hands twisting the hem of her dress. As the candles flickered, Zoe leaned close and whispered, "Make a wish." Ruby closed her eyes tightly, then blew with all her might. The candles went dark, and when the lights came back on,
Great
her
job,
smile
you
was
did it.
wider than Ethan had ever seen. The presents were simple but heartfelt. Zoe had written and illustrated a small book titled The Adventures of Daisy and Lily, a story of 2 dolls who became best friends. Angela gave her a music box shaped like a crescent moon that played a familiar lullaby. Ethan handed her an envelope.
Pull it
Inside
nice
was a
and tight.
folded piece of paper with highlighted
Now
sections.
you can tie your
Ruby
shoes
read it
all by
slowly,
yourself.
her mouth moving without sound. Then she looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide. "Is this?" she asked. He nodded. "That is the date." Angela placed a hand on Ruby's shoulder. 2 weeks from today, you will stand before a judge and decide where your forever home is.
It is the
Only if you
first
want
day
to.
of school.
Ruby did not hesitate. I already
Ready for
decided.
second grade.
The courthouse was quiet, its gray hallways echoing softly underfoot. Ruby wore a navy dress with a white ribbon, her locket glinting faintly against her chest. She held Ethan's hand tightly, clutching a folded piece of paper in her other hand. Zoe skipped beside Angela, whispering encouragement. Inside the courtroom, Judge
Hello,
Carolyn
my
Reeves
dears.
looked over her glasses at
And
Ruby
what's
with a
this one,
smile
honey?
both firm and
It's a
kind.
dinosaur.
"I hear
A
this is an
T-Rex.
important day for you,"
I
she
learned a
said.
new word, too.
Ruby stepped forward
And
bravely
what is this
and
word?
offered the folded paper. The judge unfolded it carefully.
That's right.
Inside was a drawing of a house with 3 figures standing beneath a red heart. A dog curled at their feet, snowflakes drifting from the sky. Above it, in shaky crayon, it read, "My forever family." The judge's eyes softened. "Ruby, do you know what adoption means?" "It means someone chooses you, and you choose them back," Ruby said. "And is that what you want?" Ruby turned, looked at Ethan. He gave her a steady nod. She turned back to the judge and whispered, "Yes, I want to stay forever." The judge looked at Ethan. "Do you understand the responsibilities to love and protect this child as your own?" "She is my own," Ethan said firmly, his voice steady but full of emotion. The gavel came down softly. "By the power vested in me by the state of Oregon,
beautiful.
I hereby finalize the adoption of Ruby Elaine Carter Blake. Congratulations." A cheer broke through the courtroom. Zoe squealed, hugging Ruby so hard they almost toppled. Ruby laughed, a full-bodied giggle that filled the air with music. Ethan dropped to one knee, arms open wide, and Ruby ran into them. Outside the courthouse, the Department of Family Services photographer captured a photo of the new family. Ruby stood in the center, Zoe beside her, Ethan's hands on their shoulders. Behind them, the courthouse loomed like a cathedral, but above them the clouds parted, revealing streaks of blue sky. A new beginning had been written. That evening, back home, Ethan stood at the mantel. He gently placed a new framed photo beside one of Grace holding newborn Zoe. This one showed himself, Zoe, and Ruby smiling in front of the courthouse. The fire crackled in the hearth. Soft footsteps approached. Ruby appeared in pajamas, her hair damp from her bath, holding a crayon drawing behind her back. "I made you something," she said shyly. He knelt down. "For me?" She handed him the picture. It showed a man holding 2 little girls by the hand beneath a giant sun. In the corner, a tiny trash can was drawn, and beside it, a little girl holding a heart. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for seeing me behind the trash can." Ethan's throat tightened.
We made a little
He pulled her
snow
close,
person.
whispering into her hair,
That looks
"I
so
saw your heart
good."
long before I saw
I
you,
like the button.
and you did not need rescuing. You rescued us." Ruby clung to him, her arms strong and certain. For the first time in years, Ethan felt not only hope, but permanence. This was not a fragile beginning anymore. This was forever. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen not in boardrooms or under bright lights, but in the quiet corners of a home, in the fragile exchange between 2 broken hearts. Ethan Blake,
belong
a man
here.
who had lost almost everything, discovered that healing did not come from shutting out the world, but from opening his door to a little girl searching for hope in a trash bin. Ruby, small and trembling, carried only a rusted button and memories too heavy for her age. Yet, by stepping inside that house, she carried with her the spark that would reignite life in both Ethan and Zoe. This was not a story of wealth rescuing poverty, nor was it the tale of a savior swooping in at the perfect moment. It was a story of mutual rescue. Ethan gave Ruby warmth, a bed, a name spoken with tenderness. But Ruby gave Ethan something far greater, a reason to feel again, to believe again. She gave Zoe laughter, friendship, and the courage to reopen her little heart. In the weaving together of their broken pieces, they became whole. The moments were small yet sacred. A cup of cocoa shared. A doll offered without hesitation. Paper snowflakes taped to a window as laughter returned to a house once drowning in silence. Each act, fragile on its own, stitched into something enduring, a family. When Ruby stood before the judge, her crayon drawing clutched in hand, she did not simply ask to stay. She declared what her heart already knew. Family is not just blood, it is love chosen again and again. The gavel's soft strike did not just finalize an adoption, it sealed a promise, whispered across countless nights. You are safe. You belong. Forever. For Ethan, the man who had spent sleepless nights staring at an untouched coffee cup that once belonged to his late wife, there was finally peace. For Zoe, who had stopped calling him daddy out of grief, there was joy. And for Ruby, who once dug through trash for scraps, there was a forever home. Together, they were no longer survivors of loss. They were builders of love. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that hope can be found in the unlikeliest places. Healing often begins with a single choice: to open your hands, your home, or your heart. Somewhere, someone is waiting not just to be saved, but to save you too. Join us in sharing more stories like this, stories that remind us of love, resilience, and the beauty of second chances. Subscribe to Loss and Healing today, and let us continue this journey together, finding light even in the darkest places. Because every ending can become a beginning, and every broken heart can be part of a new family.